What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and in this video we are going to break down the 2022 schedule for the Georgia Bulldogs. If you're an SEC fan, if you're a Georgia fan, please subscribe to our SEC channel and our Georgia channel here at the Voice of College Football. Before we get into the 2022 schedule, let's look back at the 2021 schedule for Georgia. Of course, the schedule that this team had that led them to a national championship. Here is the schedule for 2021. You can see here, it wasn't that tough of a schedule. Clemson, we thought, was going to be a huge test for Georgia. It was a close game, but at the end of the day, Georgia was the better team. I still go back to that game and think that if Georgia had not played so conservatively offensively, they would have won this game much easier. I think that they didn't realize the struggles that Clemson would have this year, and they were kind of playing conservative and thought that it was going to be a tough four-quarter game, and that's kind of how they played it. But if they had been a bit more aggressive, perhaps that game would have been a little bit easier for them. So that was their big non-conference game. UAB actually wound up being a pretty good team, a Group of 5 team as well. They played them last year. Out of the SEC West, they played Auburn and they played Arkansas. Of course, Arkansas wound up having a pretty good year. And we thought that was going to be a big game. Of course, that was one where Georgia just jumped on them early and ran away with that game. You could really see just how good this Georgia team was. That was maybe their first SEC test. They played South Carolina and Vanderbilt before that. But that was wound up being an easy win and went on the road to beat Auburn. Took care of business against Kentucky. Beat Florida in a game that was close until right before halftime. And then, of course, they pulled away with all that crazy end of the first half. Took care of business against Missouri, Tennessee. Charleston Southern was an easy win, Georgia Tech. So, again, a schedule that didn't really challenge them a whole lot in 2021. Let's fast forward now to 2022. Here is the schedule. Before we go game by game, let's look at who Georgia plays outside of the SEC East, because we know, of course, they're going to play all the teams in the SEC East. And they don't really have any control over that. But the teams that they'll play outside of the SEC East, you're going to play Oregon and Atlanta. Huge non-conference game there. I'm curious to see what this Oregon team is going to look like. That should be a fun one there. Then they have Samford, Kent State, and then Georgia Tech, who has not been good for quite some time. So not a very tough non-conference schedule. They do play Oregon in a game that could be pretty tough. Again, it's hard to say. It's in Atlanta. You like Georgia's chances in that game, of course. And then out of the SEC West, they'll play Auburn and Mississippi State. So they don't play Alabama and they don't play Texas A&M. Once again, a very favorable draw there out of the West for Georgia. And, Auburn and Mississippi State, both teams that have potential to be pretty good, but I don't think many people expect them to be at the top of the SEC West this next season. Okay, so back to the schedule. They will open up with that game against Oregon in Atlanta on September the 3rd. Like I said, this is going to be a big-time non-conference matchup. Bo Nix transferring to Oregon. That is very interesting. A team that's pretty talented, but are they going to be able to match up with one of the premier teams in the SEC? Talent-wise, Georgia should still have a pretty big advantage in that matchup. And like I said, they're playing in their backyard. They're playing in Atlanta. You got to like Georgia's chances in that game and against Samford as well. A sneaky early test potentially on September 17th when Georgia will go on the road to face South Carolina. Of course, Spencer Rattler transferring to South Carolina, a program with a lot of momentum. They finished strong, a lot of energy around that program. Shane Beamer doing a nice job. Perhaps an upset alert type game there on the road at South Carolina, September 17th. They'll play Kent State after that, then Missouri on the road, then Auburn at home, and then they'll play Vanderbilt after that, and they'll get a bye week. So if you look at that first part of the schedule before they get the bye week, before playing Florida, South Carolina, a little bit tricky. You've got Oregon in a big non-conference game, but nothing that really jumps out to me as being a real challenge for Georgia, or I think, wow, Georgia might lose this game. Yeah, they could lose to Oregon. They could lose to South Carolina on the road, but it's unlikely. Georgia should be the better team. Upsets do happen, and that's why I said you might put that South Carolina game on upset alert, but Georgia will be the better team in those games. Then they'll get the bye week before playing Florida, a Florida team that we don't really know a whole lot about, with a new head coach, a lot of transfers coming in. How good will they be? It's a rivalry. You would think that the game will probably be pretty close, but they'll get a bye week before playing that. And before the bye week, they have Vanderbilt. So it's almost like you have 2 bye weeks before playing Florida. So that bodes well for Georgia here on the schedule. Tennessee after that, perhaps that could be a challenge for them, but it's a home game. Tennessee should be pretty good. I think they'll continue to improve this year. Mississippi State follows that one up. On the road at Mississippi State, November 12th, and then on the road at Kentucky, November 19th. That's a sneaky tough back-to-back there on the road. Mississippi State should be a decent team this year. Kentucky, I think, has a chance to be really good, actually. A top 10, top 15 type team, potentially. They haven't proved that they can play with Georgia, though, and no real reason to think that they will this year. But if there was a potential upset, you could look at one happening late in the season there after Florida, after Tennessee, perhaps a letdown on the road at Mississippi State or on the road at Kentucky. And then that South Carolina game early on in September or in the middle of September, that one could be tricky as well. Georgia Tech at the end of the season, a home game, a game that Georgia should be able to take care of business in. So when you look at the schedule overall, you break it down kind of by month. The month of September, you got Oregon, a tricky game against South Carolina. The month of October, not too tough. Of course, Florida will be there at the end. And then that month of November, with Tennessee, Mississippi State, and Kentucky back-to-back on the road, that's a pretty tough stretch there. So I think overall the Georgia schedule might be a little bit tougher this year, but it's still a schedule that doesn't really test them. And I think Georgia should be a pretty big favorite in every game that they play in 2022.